Two men, the world's two largest militaries, the world's two largest economies, 3 days behind closed doors in Beijing. And when it was over, Trump pumped his fist, boarded Air Force One, and told the world they'd settled a lot of different problems. China said nothing. Not a single confirmed deal, not one signed agreement. The Boeing order Trump announced, 200 jets, Beijing wouldn't even acknowledge it happened. The oil deal, the agriculture agreement, silence. So what actually happened in those rooms? And what does Beijing know that Washington isn't saying? This was May 2026, Beijing. And for 3 days, the city looked like something between a state ceremony and a controlled production. Streets closed, motorcades rolling through the capital, hundreds of children waving U.S. and Chinese flags at the airport when Air Force One touched down Wednesday night. An honor guard on the tarmac when it left Friday afternoon. Donald Trump became the first sitting American president to visit China since 2017, nearly a decade. He met Xi Jinping at the Great Hall of the People. He walked through Zhongnanhai, the Communist Party's most secretive leadership compound, where Xi himself lives and works. He visited the Temple of Heaven, ate Beijing roast duck at a state banquet, shared Kung Pao chicken and brownies at a working lunch, and called Xi a man I respect greatly, really a friend. The atmospherics were almost unprecedented in warmth. The outcomes? Far harder to read. If you want fast, fact-based coverage that cuts through the ceremony to what actually happened and what it means, subscribe now, because this story is still unfolding. Let's walk through this carefully, because the gap between what was said and what was confirmed is itself the story. Trump arrived in Beijing on Wednesday evening, greeted not by Xi personally, but by Chinese Vice President Han Zheng, a deliberate diplomatic choreography. Sending the vice president signals respect without overplaying the hand before formal talks begin. Xi was waiting. Thursday was the main event. The two leaders met in front of the Great Hall of the People. Red carpet, marching soldiers, music, cameras from every angle. In their opening remarks, Xi said the world had arrived at a new crossroads. Trump said they had a fantastic relationship and that he had such respect for Xi and China. The body language, multiple observers noted, was visibly relaxed, a stark contrast to how the two governments had been treating each other in the months before. Then came the substance, or what passed for it. In their bilateral meeting, Xi raised Taiwan immediately. He called it the most important issue in China-U.S. relations and issued a direct warning, saying it could become very dangerous if not handled properly. Taiwan's government responded the same day, saying China itself is the sole source of instability in the region. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, speaking separately, stated that U.S. policy on Taiwan remains unchanged. That's significant. There had been real concern in the weeks leading up to this summit that Trump might use Taiwan as a negotiating chip, softening American commitments in exchange for trade concessions. Rubio's statement was a clear public signal. That didn't happen, at least not officially. On Iran, this is where things get complicated. Trump said he and Xi agreed that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. He said the two leaders were aligned on wanting to end the conflict, reopen the Strait of Hormuz. He also made a pointed comment. The U.S. doesn't need the Strait of Hormuz open at all, but China does. That was leverage, stated openly, in public. China's foreign ministry, meanwhile, said the Iran war should never have happened. Not exactly an alignment. Thursday evening, the state banquet. Beijing roast duck, lobster, pan-fried pork buns. Xi told Trump that China's national vision of great rejuvenation and Trump's MAGA agenda could go hand in hand. Both leaders emphasized they must never mess up the relationship. Trump invited Xi and his wife to the White House in September. Later, in a Fox News interview, Trump claimed Xi had agreed not to provide military equipment to Iran, that China would order 200 Boeing jets, and that a major U.S. oil purchase deal had been reached. Friday morning, Xi hosted Trump at Zhongnanhai, a compound so restricted that its interior is censored on Chinese digital mapping platforms. Only a handful of foreign leaders have ever entered. They strolled through the gardens. Trump admired the roses. Xi offered to send him seeds. They had tea, which in Chinese diplomacy is not casual, and a final working lunch. Then Air Force One left Beijing. Trump gave a fist pump on the tarmac. Children waved flags, and the plane climbed out of Chinese airspace. Here's what remained on the ground when it did. No signed documents, no joint statement of substance, no confirmation from Beijing of the Boeing deal, the oil deal, the agricultural agreements, or the claim about military equipment to Iran. When China's foreign ministry spokesperson was asked directly, the response was that both countries need to act on the important common understandings, which is diplomatic language for "we'll see." Trump said they settled a lot of different problems that other people wouldn't have been able to settle. Beijing won't say what those problems are. And one analyst put it plainly. The last time Trump left Beijing claiming massive deals, in 2017, most of them quietly disappeared. Every single one. To understand why this summit carries so much weight and so much risk, you need to zoom out for a moment. The U.S. and China are not simply rivals. They are the two countries whose decisions shape global supply chains, energy markets, military calculations, and technological development for virtually everyone else on the planet. When they fight, prices rise, alliances shift, and smaller countries get squeezed. When they talk warmly, markets respond, tensions ease, at least temporarily. This week, oil prices jumped on the news that Trump said China agreed to purchase U.S. crude, not because the deal was confirmed, because Trump said it. That's the gravitational pull these two countries carry. And the stakes right now are unusually stacked. The Iran situation is not background noise. It is a live, ongoing conflict involving U.S. and Israeli military action. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical choke points for energy transport, has been disrupted. China, the world's largest importer of liquefied natural gas, has had roughly a third of its LNG supply interrupted. That gives Washington real economic leverage, and Trump used it visibly, almost bluntly, in his public comments. 3 LNG tankers reportedly departed the U.S. this week, apparently bound for China, according to Reuters. They could arrive by late June. That's not a confirmed deal, but it's a signal the energy conversation is already moving. Then there's the tech question. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, who wandered Beijing's South Logu Lane on Friday morning, eating fried noodles and getting stopped for selfies, was a last-minute addition to the trip. He's been lobbying the U.S. government to loosen export controls on NVIDIA's advanced chips. Trump reportedly removed some of those controls. But China hasn't confirmed any new purchases, in part because Beijing actively wants to develop its own domestic chip makers, and buying NVIDIA chips would undermine that goal. Apple's Tim Cook was there too, watching his company lose market share in China to Huawei and Xiaomi. Tesla's Elon Musk attended, while BYD continues to pull ahead of Tesla in Chinese EV sales. These aren't just business stories. They are the actual terrain of U.S.-China competition. Do you think this summit genuinely shifted anything? Or was it mostly theater? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. Here's the contradiction that should stop you cold. In 2017, Trump left Beijing with announced deals totaling over $250 billion. He brought nearly 30 executives. This time, he brought 17. The deals announced are a fraction of what 2017 produced. And analysts at Capital Economics noted flatly that almost none of the 2017 agreements actually materialized, including an $84 billion Chinese investment in West Virginia and a $43 billion Alaska LNG project. Both evaporated as the relationship deteriorated. That's the hidden ceiling on this summit's optimism. The room can feel warm, the food can be excellent, and the agreements can still vanish. Here's what almost nobody is leading with. While Trump was walking through Zhongnanhai's gardens, the Kremlin was watching and talking. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov confirmed Friday that Vladimir Putin's upcoming visit to China will be, in part, an opportunity to debrief on exactly what happened in those meetings. Putin wants to know, directly from Xi, what was said between Washington and Beijing. And Peskov offered something revealing. He noted that by purchasing power parity, China is the world's first economy, and the U.S. is second. That framing from Moscow during a Washington-Beijing summit was not accidental. There is a triangle here that almost no summit coverage addresses: the U.S., China, and Russia. China remains Russia's most important strategic partner. Chinese-made electronic components are essential to Russia's military production. China is Russia's largest oil buyer. Any warming between Washington and Beijing does not exist in isolation from that. Xi cannot simply pivot toward the U.S. without Moscow watching. And Putin is about to go to Beijing to find out what happened. Step away from the diplomatic tables for a moment, come down to street level. On Friday morning in Beijing, an NVIDIA CEO in a leather jacket was eating ice cream on an ancient alleyway while crowds gathered around him for photos. That image, casual, almost surreal, captured something real about the nature of this summit. For 3 days, Beijing belonged to something larger than itself. Streets around the motorcade routes were barricaded. Police stood at regular intervals. Members of the public pressed up against cordons to watch the motorcades pass. State television broadcast carefully edited footage of the garden walks and handshakes. The image being constructed, for Chinese audiences especially, was one of a superpower receiving the world's most powerful leader as an equal in its most sacred political space. That matters inside China. Xi's legitimacy is tied in part to China's standing in the world. Having Trump walk through Zhongnanhai, call the roses the most beautiful anyone has ever seen, and say he could get used to this, that plays domestically. It signals that China is not isolated, not weakened, that its leader commands global respect. For ordinary Beijing residents, the reactions were layered. In a park near the summit venues, CNN spoke to several people on Friday. A 64-year-old retiree named Xi Jinping said she hoped the visit would make life easier for regular people, that when relations between countries improve, governance becomes more effective. A 30-year-old finance worker named Han Jingyi said she watched Trump and Xi at the Temple of Heaven on television and felt it marked a turning point. A food and beverage professional, Yang Yansha, 53, described the past decade of U.S.-China tension as extremely tense, but called the summit a significant signal of easing, one that should be very beneficial for the people of both countries, particularly in the economic sphere. These are not government talking points. They are people who live inside an economy that has felt the weight of trade wars, supply chain disruptions, and geopolitical pressure for years. The cautious hope they expressed is real, and it exists alongside real uncertainty. Because here's what those same people don't control: whether the deals hold, whether the warmth outlasts the aircraft's contrails, whether the next spike in Taiwan tensions, or the next U.S. tech restriction, or the next sanctions package unravels whatever was built in these 3 days. The families of Boeing factory workers in Seattle care about whether China actually orders those 200 jets, or whether, as in 2017, the announcement fades quietly into nothing. Farmers watching for a double-digit billions agricultural deal want to know if the crops will actually ship. Energy traders who moved markets on Trump's words this week will be tracking every tanker. And then there are the people who exist in the shadow of the larger crises orbiting this summit. The conflict involving Iran, which both leaders acknowledged has disrupted global energy flows, pushing up costs that ordinary households feel at the pump and on utility bills. The Strait of Hormuz question is not abstract geopolitics. It determines whether tankers move, whether energy prices stabilize or climb, whether countries that depend on Middle Eastern oil find alternatives or face shortages. For those people in Asia, in Europe, in the Middle East, the summit in Beijing was always about more than two men walking through a garden. It was about whether the world's two most powerful governments could find enough shared interest to prevent the current series of crises from metastasizing further. The answer after 3 days is possibly, partially, not yet confirmed. Victor Gao, a scholar who once served as Deng Xiaoping's English interpreter and now chairs a professor post at Soochow University, gave the summit a rating of 9.99 out of 10. He called it historical. He said he hoped the visit to the Temple of Heaven, where emperors once prayed for good harvests and stability, carried meaning for many years to come. That hope is real, but hope and policy are not the same thing. The U.S.-China trade truce from last year's South Korea summit expires later in 2026. Nobody in either government has confirmed it will be renewed, or on what terms. The Strait of Hormuz is still a live crisis. Iran is still the unresolved variable, and Beijing's stated position that the conflict should never have happened does not align with Washington's posture. Taiwan is not resolved. The warning Xi delivered in that meeting room that it could become very dangerous was not empty language. It was a formal position delivered at the highest level to the one American whose unpredictability on the issue has kept Taipei watching every summit with anxiety. And Putin is heading to Beijing to debrief, to compare notes, to make sure China hasn't drifted. The warmth in those garden photographs is real, but so are the forces pulling in the opposite direction. There is a phrase in diplomacy: the atmospherics were good. It's the phrase used when leaders smile for cameras and the underlying conflicts remain exactly where they were. This summit produced excellent atmospherics. Xi chose Zhongnanhai, a compound foreign leaders almost never enter, as a deliberate gesture of reciprocity for Trump hosting him at Mar-a-Lago in 2017. That choice communicates, we are treating you as an equal. We are investing in this relationship. The symbolism was precise and intentional. The temple visit, the garden stroll, the state banquet, the tea, all of it was choreographed to signal a relationship that both sides want the world to see as stable. But stability, in U.S.-China terms, has a specific definition. It doesn't mean resolved. It means managed. It means the two sides have agreed, for now, not to let their disagreements cascade into something uncontrollable. Technology export controls, still in place. Taiwan, still a potential flashpoint. Chinese EVs, still locked out of the U.S. market. Sanctions on Chinese satellite firms accused of helping Iran, still active. China's policy of supporting domestic chip makers over foreign ones, still operative. Beijing's refusal to abandon Russia, still structural. The one area where this summit may have genuinely moved something, according to analysts, is energy. The Iran war created a specific vulnerability for China that the U.S. can address. If that oil and LNG relationship develops, it gives both governments an ongoing economic incentive to keep the channel open. That's not nothing. That's actually how durable diplomatic relationships get built, through mutual material interest, not just ceremonies. The AI question is worth watching closely. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirmed that both sides discussed how to put guardrails on artificial intelligence development, not stifle it, but manage it. A White House memo circulating weeks before the summit accused Chinese entities of stealing U.S. AI technology at industrial scale. And yet here were both governments acknowledging they might need to cooperate, at least partially, on a technology that neither fully controls and both fear is moving faster than governance can track. That's a genuinely new development. What intelligence agencies in multiple capitals are now analyzing is the gap, the distance between the public summitry and the private agreements. What did Trump actually say to Xi behind closed doors about Taiwan? What are the real terms of the proposed Boeing and energy arrangements? What did Xi signal about Iran that didn't make it into any readout? The Kremlin wants to know. Taipei wants to know. Seoul and Tokyo, who watch every U.S.-China interaction as a direct input into their own security calculations, want to know. And here's the forward tension that nobody in Beijing or Washington is resolving right now. This summit happened because both sides needed it. China needed to demonstrate it is not isolated amid U.S.-Israeli military action and ongoing sanctions pressure. Washington needed to show it can manage its most important and most complicated bilateral relationship while simultaneously engaged in multiple conflicts. Both leaders got the images they came for. What neither has produced is the architecture, the durable, formal, verifiable structure that would make any of these gains last. The 2017 summit produced $250 billion in announcements. Almost none materialized. The lessons of that experience sit in the diplomatic memory of everyone in those rooms. One Chinese academic gave this summit a 9.99 out of 10. The missing fraction is the part that gets tested, not in gardens, but in the months ahead, when tariff deadlines arrive, when Taiwan does something Beijing doesn't like, when U.S. tech restrictions tighten again, when the next sanctions list goes out. That's when we find out what was actually settled. And that's exactly why you need to stay close to this story. Because what happens in the next 30, 60, 90 days will tell us far more about what this summit actually produced than anything said in Beijing this week. Will China confirm the Boeing deal? Will those LNG tankers dock? And will a formal energy agreement follow? Will Xi actually visit the White House in September? And when Putin sits down with Xi in Beijing, what does that conversation produce? The summit is over. The consequences are just beginning. What do you think? Was this summit a genuine turning point or an expensive 3-day photo opportunity? Drop your read in the comments. And if you want every major development in this story covered as it happens, subscribe, because this one is going to keep moving.